Hello everyone, this is Amir from Audio Science Review. I have a treat for you in the form of one of the best speakers I've tested since I started testing speakers. It's the Genelec 8361A. It's a powered three-way studio monitor, but many people buy these also for home listening or building home theaters, and this one is extremely suitable for that. It's a typical of the newer generation of Genelecs with this coaxial driver in here, and then it has underneath this baffle, you have dual oval woofers in here, and then there's a port in the back. The look is not for everyone. I used to not like it, but it's sort of grown on me now, and but, you know, it's polarizing from that point of view. In a professional setting would be great, but in home use, you have to decide whether, you know, you can tolerate something that doesn't look like a piece of furniture on this. It's like a giant bookshelf speaker, but it weighs as much as many tower speakers, floor standing speakers. It weighs about 70 pounds. So it's a two-person lift and carry. It's extremely dense case. I think it's made of cast aluminum, and it is very, very stout. It feels like you could run over it with a tank and it would still survive on this thing. There's a single strap in the back to lift it. Unfortunately, it's not enough. When you grab it with a flexible strap that's in the back, it will just tilt over, become like a suitcase, and then you're carrying 70 pounds with one arm away from you. So not a very easy thing to move around. You need two people to move it. Because it was so heavy, I also didn't take a picture of it in the back, but you have a suite of inputs, obviously balanced input, but you also have digital inputs, and it supports the GLM, which is the application that Genelec has for automatically or manually setting parametric EQs and target curves for the speaker. And if you buy their kit, you're able to do the room analysis automatically and then modify as you see fit. So with that intro, you can read more about it elsewhere. Typical of my reviews, I'm focused on performance, not as much features and what have you. Our most important graph is the spinorama, or the CEA 2034 standard set of frequency response measurements. Most important one is the on-axis response, which is this black line in here. And as you see in here, for speaker, this is very, very flat. There's a little bit of a step down in bass frequencies, but Genelec's own measurements doesn't show this, and I'm communicating with them to try to find out whether that's a measurement difference between us or what the cause might be. So that this in another one of the Genelec speakers also. So something needs to be resolved, but you know, it's just 1 or 2 dB difference and something that easily can be adjusted. On this thing. It's really just the bass drivers. The rest of them are very flat. The directivity is great, and we can tell that by comparing the on-axis response to this blue one, which is the important reflections. And we see that the two have very equal gap between them, and that's shown down here as also a difference between them. So it's a very, very nice measurement from that point of view. One thing that's super impressive is the how deep the frequency response goes. This is 30 hertz over here, and it's essentially flat to 30 hertz over here. You want to follow the dashed red line, which is the total sound power that includes the port that's in the back. And so that's basically within shouting distance of 30 hertz. And if you put it in a room, likely this will tilt even higher because of the room loading that you get. The CEA 2034 also stipulates a set of reflections, which is valid for far field listening or regular home music listening. Not as much for studio monitor listening near field, but it's close enough. If I draw a line in here on the sum of the reflections, because the directivity is good, that means this line is also very much matches the response, which is what we want to see. We don't want to see variations up and down. We want to see smooth. What this also says is that you can put the speaker in many rooms and it'll sound good. It's not room dependent because all the reflections have similar tonality to on-axis. So the tonality doesn't change. The bass response will change if you put in different rooms, but that happens with every speaker. So that's one of the nice things. The second nice thing is that when you have this kind of nice directivity, you can also equalize the speaker very easily and know that both on and off axis change together. If the on and off axis are not the same, then making an equalization change will change the on axis and off axis differently, and so you can't correct off axis errors with EQ, whereas now you can because the two are very similar. We can put the last two graphs together and build a composite that predicts what the response would be in a room, and generally want a tilted down response, and because that sounds flat to us. If you want measured, tilted down, but that's subjective, it will sound flat. And this is exceptionally good. It's basically as good as it gets. An ideal one will look like that line, but little wiggles in there, here and there. It's just nature of a mechanical device trying to produce a frequency response. So extremely good. One of the problems with the ported speakers in about 90% of speakers I test is that at some point the wavelength of the sound matches half or quarter of the distance between vertical, horizontal distances of the enclosure, and that causes a resonance. So literally the box starts to amplify things, and when you have a port, the sound comes out of the port and radiates as if it's a mid-range speaker. And here, we see that usually when I measure the port by itself, as I've done here in brown. And this is the output of the port, which is what we want. And then we see that the response just drops like a rock. It then resonates up a little bit, but it's way down from the output of the woofer and the mid-range. So this is less than 1% interference with respect to the levels here. And that means that it's basically not contributing anything. And the fact that it's pointed backwards means it's got to bounce off a wall and come back or radiate around. So it loses some amplitude there in addition to that. So this is not easy to do, requires very, very good design. Like I said, 80% of the speakers I test, these peaks in here are way up here. And that's unfortunate when they're also doing the crossover region. So clearly some smart design has gone into here. The other smart design is what we expect from a company like Genelec, is this very smooth directivity. So if we plot what happens, where sound level drops by 6 dB, per frequency in here, we see that it's wide as it normally is, with the woofers are omnidirectional always. And then when it starts to get narrow, it then gets very controlled and stays flat and smooth in here, which is very, very good characteristics. It means all frequencies, again, are hitting the walls equally and reflecting back at you. You don't get some frequencies higher than the others. And if you're using this near field, it means when you're moving around, your tonality is not shifting. The other nice thing is that these other curves that are at more of attenuation are also very similar to this. And you can see in here how these graphs are so nice together. This gets messed up if there are diffractions and other things where the sound goes around the corners, and if the corners are sharp, you get the little tiny speakers everywhere interfering with each other, and you get irregularity in here. The speaker's got just massive waveguide, and it's really smooth edges and everything really helps with that. And you can see that same output when we plot it as a sort of a contour map. We can see this is a very controlled, think about this as a 6 dB line I was showing you. But look how smooth the graduations are, and it doesn't really get messy till you get way, way lower amplitudes in here. The shift from the strongest to the weakest sound is very, very smooth. One thing coaxial drivers give you is that their vertical directivity is almost as good as their horizontal directivity. Typical woofer and a tweeter two-way speakers don't do this. Horizontally, the axis is aligned between a woofer and a mid-range or a tweeter, but vertically they're separated. And as you go up and down, the timing changes and you get a response that's not very unified. Here we have one big coaxial driver in the middle control, so it doesn't care if you're going vertical or you're going horizontal. And you get the same smooth grab. What this means is that you can take the speaker and rotate it on your side. Indeed, it comes with a different mount for using it that way, and you get a center speaker out of it that's completely matched with your left and right. So if you want to use it for that application, it's great. Or, you know, in your studio, you may want to have these horizontally placed because that way they, you know, the center may be lower for you, or it may look more pleasing. The clip-hole near-field scanner is able to completely compute the 3D sound sphere at any frequency at any point in space. So I've started to tell it to plot 3 different frequencies, 1 kilohertz, 2 kilohertz, and 3 kilohertz. These are where our hearing is most sensitive. And we look at the geometry of the waveform from the speaker as it's expanding. And it's color-coded again. Red means the strongest, loudest, and green and blue means least loud. The wavefront in the front is the most important thing. And we can see at 1 kilohertz, it's just this gorgeous sphere that's just coming at you, fully uniform, expanding in space. A little bit more wiggly at 2 kilohertz. It's probably the 2 woofers getting a little stronger in here. But then they settle down and we're back to a very, very smooth radiation pattern. If you look at some other cheap budget speakers, they're not well implemented. You see all kinds of twisted shapes in here. And that means that the sound that's going up in the ceiling coming down has different tonality than the sound that comes at you. Or if you move up and down a little bit or left and right, sound will vary. This is basically textbook perfect on this thing. As far as distortion, this is an incredibly powerful speaker. I think the woofer has 700 watts of Class D amplification alone. And when I tested at 86 dB SPL, I'm listening in my measurement room with heavy-duty ear protection. Even through those, I could just hear this smooth, beautiful sweep from very low frequencies all the way up. And this is at 86 dB at 1 meter. Always also measure at 10 dB higher, and still, like on a lot of the speakers I measured, this distortion will actually shoot up as high as the sound you're hearing. And when you do that, you get about 100% distortion. So this is way, way below that. It's extremely clean as speakers go. But I wanted to push this. It's such a big speaker, so I pushed it even 10 dB higher. So now we're at 106 dB SPL. Now the clipping light came on, and the frequency response drops in the treble region, which is what I've seen the protection circuit do in Genelec. It's a compressor really, and pulls back the treble, trying to save that. So they probably have experience knowing that that's the part that's stressed the most, not the woofers. We still haven't hit 100% distortion, which again many speakers do on this thing. So still very, very controlled. So, and I'll talk about my subjective experience later on, but distortion is just not in your vocabulary when you're using this 8361. This is the waterfall display. I've actually tweaked it a little bit, and hence the reason it's kind of looking smooth up here. I'm not sure I'm a fan of that. I may go back to the way I was showing it before. It shows a number of resonances, but it always does that. And if I just change one of the parameters down here, which is the floor, by just 1 or 2 dB, a lot of these disappear. And I play with it, and every time I post it, it's really not a useful graph unless you're just troubleshooting something and you want to confirm something. In general, every one of these, time domain extensions actually correspond to a peak over here, and you can see them over here with these larger ones that they're basically correlated anyway. So if you just look at a frequency response, every place there's a little wiggle up and down, there will be one of these. What are the causes? Could be anything, slight resonances in the enclosure, the drivers, or even the fixture. I have this. This is sitting on top of my robotic measurement system, and you can literally shake and resonate the measurement system. So don't go nuts looking at analyzing this waterfall. People love it because it looks fancy and beautiful, but it's really not very informative. I also don't usually post the impulse response, but in this case I did because it just looked very idealized and very smooth. It just has a single pulse and it's done. Usually multiple drivers, the treble comes first, and then the mid-range, and then the woofer will have a large extension. Here I was surprised at how they're all basically time aligned. and show up pretty. What the audibility impact of that is, I don't know. It certainly is. There's nothing wrong with having to be better than we tolerate, and this is definitely the case. So the next test in here is listening test. I always listen. You've heard me explain what these graphs mean, but ultimately there are some subtleties that I can't quantify in these tests. And with this 8361A, as soon as I played it, it just was incredibly nice sounding, with a tiny caveat that it just sounded a little light, which I expect studio monitors to do. There tend to be more flatter response than hi-fi speakers. I'm very sensitive to high frequency exaggeration or distortion, and it was nothing remotely like that. But seeing that the bass was down 1 or 2 dB, I put a shelving filter in there that just took the bass and flatly moved it up a couple of dB. When I did that on some tracks, it just made an amazing difference in the amount of sub bass that it brought out. But it got a little boomy, and I know that at 105 hertz, I have a room mode that exaggerates things. So in reality, there's a peak in the response in my room that shouldn't be there. So from experience, I just dialed 2 dB down in here and pulled that down. Once I did that, it was just amazing, amazing, amazing. I've never heard a powered monitor have this kind of dynamics, this kind of power, and this kind of deep bass. I mean, you do not for a second wish you had a subwoofer. Not only is there sub bass content spitting out of this speaker, it does it in the most uniform, integrated way possible. I mean, I've had subs that were incredibly well integrated with the system, and still once in a while I would go in there and turn the level down a little 1 or 2 dB and turn it back up depending on what I'm playing. You just, getting two curves to match is hard when you buy a subwoofer from one company and a speaker from another company, then you put it in a room that messes with both of them. Getting the two to align and work perfectly all the time is very hard. This one was just perfect. I mean, I just had no need to want to get a subwoofer, nor thinking for a moment that it was something wrong with the integration of it. It just sounded like beautiful sub bass coming down to 25, 30 hertz. And while the speaker, you could localize the sound, the bass would just, as it normally is, it just would emanate out of this thing. And I keep saying that's not possible. It's not possible. The speaker is like a chunky, large bookshelf speaker. But this beautiful, beautiful, sub bass is just coming out of the speaker. And it was bringing out extension that I've never, ever heard in any other speaker I've tested. My own Revell Salon 2s can reproduce them. But, everything else I test them, they just ignore and roll off all these lows. This thing just goes way deep. Despite boosting at 2 dB, I could turn it up, turn it up, turn it up till the entire house wants to come down. And I'm testing it in this massive, large open space. It had no trouble filling this room with just a single speaker, which I test. So if you had two of them, I mean, sky is definitely the limit as far as the level of loudness and dynamics you could get out of the speaker. Tonality never changes. Distortion never enters the equation. What can I say? It's the most perfect speaker I've tested so far, and it's just lusciously good. It's $5,000 for a speaker, so it's not cheap. But if you think about the fact that you have 3 amplifiers in there, has digital to analog converter, has a DSP in there for applying EQ, applying room correction, trying to build a system with, over 1,000 watts of amplification and 3-way and build the crossover, all this stuff, I think it won't be possible for you to build it as good or better than this speaker. And I'm not sure you ever need to spend more than this $5,000 to get anything else. I mean, the only thing it doesn't do is it doesn't portray a massive wall of sound, which you can get with plain or electrostatic speakers and large tower speakers like my Revell Salon 2s. Those are, vertical column of sound. So when a singer sings, you literally have a scale that's the size of a singer. The scale is medium, so it's compressed down some. So maybe for large orchestral music, a big band, a massive set of speakers that would cost you 5 or 10 times more than this speaker. maybe more suitable. But, you know, if you step down from that and say, you know, I want a more compact speaker and I don't want to spend a fortune, you know, on this thing, this is incredible. I mean, I have a passion and soft spot for JBLs and Revels, and I can't recommend any of them instead of this, unless you want the attributes that I just talked about. And I think this blows many of those away in other characteristics. So, you know, it's the highest praise I can provide for this. The speaker was sent by a member, not the company, by the way. The company's very supportive. One of the few companies that listens to me. I send them measurements. They give feedback. They're on the forum. And so from that point of view, they're very supportive. But this is not a golden sample or anything. This was a speaker that was picked and by a member bought and anonymously and sent to me for testing. So, you know, if you I don't like the term in-game, but if you want to put a stake in the ground, say one day I will have speakers that just beyond a shadow of doubt is going to sound wonderful, this is it. So you want to put $5,000 per speaker in the ground and say, okay, well, I know the day I can afford $10,000 for 2 of these, you know, I'm done. Now it gets out of hand with home theater with, you know, 5 channels of these things. But maybe if you buy 5 of them, Pro Dealer will discount them for you. So yeah, for home theater, it gets to be too much. But you don't need this speaker in the backs and other channel. 3 of them in the front would be nice. You're still looking at $15,000. But, you know, that decision you've got to make. But from my point of view, this speaker, you know, makes a quantum leap forward from all the other speakers I've tested, including other Genelecs. The other Genelecs, many of them sound wonderful because they have similar kind of measurements, but I crank it up and that clipping light comes on, and then the limiter kicks in, there's static, there's pullback, especially if you go to the small ones. And for me, none of those are real targets because, you know, I don't want to have technology to tell me what it can't do. I want the limitation to be me, which is how loud I want to listen and enjoy. I want the technology to have that much headroom past where I want to be, so I never know about the limit. That's why I use 1,000-watt amplifiers. Not that I ever pump 1,000 watts, but I know that at the levels I listen to, the amplifier is never the limit. And this is the first powered speaker that I see that it has like way past headroom that I want with an extension in bass, that's subwoofer class extension. I just haven't seen it. Lower end JBLs do well as far as getting loud and so forth also, but they're again not in this class. Then again, they're third of the price, so you decide. So if the looks of the speaker are not a problem for you and the price is not an issue, this is really, really great speaker. And this is not a random subjective review, as you can tell. Stuff that I'm talking about is backed by measurements. So maybe you don't like the tonality. Well, great, use their tools and change the EQ. If you want a little bit less treble, you can tilt it down, more bass like I needed. You can boost that up. So it's fully programmable anyway. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no excuse to, you know, say, well, something's wrong with this. Well, if you say something's wrong, you better come back with very strong evidence because there's just none that I can put my finger on it. Everything is executed perfectly. And then there's ample amount of power and dynamics and extension in low frequencies. So, summarizing, is the best speaker I've tested so far, and one that finally rivals my own everyday speakers, which cost $23,000 for a pair, by the way, for no amplification, my Revell Solantus. So to put a smile on my face, a brand like this, it takes a lot, and the Genelec 8361A gets there. So if you can afford it, run and get one and start enjoying the sound. Okay, hopefully you like this review, and see you in a future video. Bye-bye.